Got some signal lights and low beams. And we got some high beams with a burnt out bulb. So this is a Fisher Minute Mount 2 system. And this type of plow has hydraulic rams for controlling the angle this way, and another hydraulic ram for piston for raising and lowering, and a quick disconnect system. So I'm not going to really get into the quick disconnect system. I will point out there's a connector here that goes directly to the motor. There's a connector here which controls the lights, and there's a connector here which controls the the hydraulics. And so aside from that, we're not going to talk about the plow anymore, because this is all about wiring the truck. So if you start inside the truck, there's a control unit here, you know, basic raise, lower, right, left, on and off. And this guy mounts on a little bracket that you screw in your dash. So 3 screws anywhere you decide. Then there's a connector here. There's a connector here, so this will unplug from there, and then this wire harness goes up above the fuse panel to a spot in the firewall that's pretty hard to see. Wiggling the cable here that is for that controller. So anyway, it goes through a hole that's drilled in the firewall. Anyway, you get the idea. Okay. Comes through the firewall. This is the cable, and there's some kind of a module here. I don't know what it's for, but it's 1, 2 studs hold it on. So I've taken those bolts off already, and it just flips out of the way, and it gives you easy access. And then you can move this piece of insulation for the firewall out of the way, and then you can see precisely where the hole, here, let's do it. There, you see where that hole was drilled? So there's a hole that was drilled and a grommet there. So to remove it, that's all got to come this way. You got to release all these safety ties. There are clamps and ties all over the place holding. So if we look at all the cable routing for this system, it's got a couple of interesting connection points. You know, the controller comes out through the firewall and runs along over the top of the engine over to the isolator module, and there is another cable that comes back from the isolator module and comes to the relay right here. From the relay, there's a red cable for hot 12 volts that connects to this battery connection right there, and on the other side of the relay, the red line runs along the front of the vehicle, or front of the radiator and the oil cooler and transmission cooler, to this connector to power the electro over hydraulic motor. There's a black cable as well that goes to the negative terminal of the battery that runs in that same sheath that goes to the motor. And then you have another cable from that isolator module that runs along underneath the air breather, out underneath the, well, to the right of the rad support, and it runs along the front and goes to that headlight. And you have another one that comes and runs to this headlight. I'll talk about those in a second. And then you have yet another one that runs along, and they all connect underneath this, like under the bumper. They pass through the bumper to this little bracket that bolts on the license plate cover. So all of those cables come back to this isolator module, which is fastened to the fender here somehow. Probably a screw holds it down. Oh, it's tie wrapped right there. I see that. Now, one cool thing is the wire harness is designed for this truck, and I was wondering how they worked it out so that the headlights would shut off when the plow was on, and of course when you disconnect the plow and drive away from it, the headlights start to work again. And I was worried they hacked up the wiring harness for the truck, but they didn't. So this is a factory harness with a connector, and this is the factory harness with the connector. They're untouched. But what happens is these factory harnesses connect to this cable, which goes back to that isolator module, and then wires come back from the isolator module to the actual lights. So basically I'm able to disconnect all of this by unplugging the connectors and put my factory wire harness back onto these headlights, and that's all that's required to put this vehicle back to stock or to install it, depending on which phase of this project you're in. So I like that very much. I'm sure the wire harness was you know, added cost to it to have something custom, but it's certainly nice now that I'm removing this plow to, you know, not have to solder wires and connect that back up. So removal will be as follows. The first thing I'm going to do before any of that is put the plow somewhere and disconnect it, and then start taking the wiring harness apart, and then I'll probably have to take the license plate off. I'm going to pull that connector from the inside through, release all these tie clamps, get all the cables towards the isolator module, put the headlights back to stock, pull all these cables towards the isolator module. Actually, the only modification to the vehicle that is not reversible is the hole drilled in the firewall, and also the holes drilled to mount this isolation module. There's a couple of screws into the fender there. So is this one to install the mounts, which I think there's 1 or 2 bolts underneath there that go to the frame, go through the front of the frame. To install the mounts, you need to do 2 things. 1, remove your tow hooks, and 2, cut this air dam right here. And I'm not super thrilled about that design. I mean, I think it sucks that you have to damage your vehicle to get this on. So with the exception of that one spot, it's a minimally invasive install. But yeah, you can see here that this piece of plastic used to carry right on through, but it would get in the way of the mount. So they had to cut it. Okay, so there you have it. That is the basics of how the wiring harness is installed for a pickup truck or SUV plow system that has electric over hydraulic and